Whether you've been DMing for years or just sat down behind the screen, you're constantly evolving and growing as you learn more about running the game. Pretty much every time you play D&D, you'll figure out something new. But let's be honest, some lessons are a little harder to learn than others. Whether your expectations for the game weren't met, your plans didn't quite pan out how you hoped, or your players didn't react to something the way you thought they would, it can be tough sometimes to accept the realities of being a dungeon master. In this video, I want to go over some of the tougher lessons I've learned in my time DMing, so you might be able to better manage some of the challenges that will inevitably come up, whether at your table or in your prep. Without further ado, let's get started. One of the best parts of D&D is that your players can do just about anything. And one of the scariest parts of DMing is that your players can do just about anything. When the possibilities for what your party can choose feel endless, how can you possibly plan for everything as a dungeon master? Well, the answer is simple. You can't. It's very tempting to try to reel in your party as much as possible by always setting them on a linear path, constantly laying out a few options as their only choices, or having NPCs nearby to act as your stand-in, keeping them on whatever path you desire. This is a trap that I think even veteran DMs can fall into. I know I have. But when you limit your player's ability to guide the story, you're hurting not just their fun, but yours too. Sometimes you have to release the reins. And to be clear, I'm not talking about obvious railroading, like telling your players to go left when they're asked to go right. Sometimes your influence on the players can be way more subtle, but still restrictive. As an example, I had an NPC who was traveling with the party, and one player needed to return home and confront their corrupt father. I was going to have the NPC suggest how they infiltrate town and get to his dad, so they could better follow what I had planned. Of course, they could ignore it, but by putting that out there through one of my characters, I knew they were likely to take that path and feel like it was the right one. So instead, I had the NPC say nothing, and I sat back and let their creativity run wild. Ultimately, the plan they came up with and how it intersected with what I had prepped already was a ton of fun and way better than if I had just told them how I wanted them to proceed. This isn't to say you should never give them options or that it's bad if they make choices you planned for. You truly can't prep for everything, so giving them choices within reason can be perfectly fine. But letting go of the reins just a bit and giving more agency to your players and how they tackle problems will almost always result in a better story and more fun for everyone. You need to strike a balance. After months of dropping hints, careful role-playing, and practicing your lines in the shower, the moment has finally come. You're about to reveal that the party's pet goblin, William, is actually the big bad evil guy's reincarnated twin brother. The time comes, you unveil the surprise, and nobody reacts. Maybe your players are confused, or maybe they saw it coming and just aren't very shocked. Or worst of all, they just don't care. Sometimes in D&D, things are going to fall flat with your players. Think of your average campaign. How many NPCs, encounters, story beats, and big battles entail just one story? It's inevitable that even if you did everything right in your planning, some things just aren't going to hit as hard as others. Not everything can be a winner. I think this is especially true for big twists in the plot. As a DM, you have access to knowledge about your story that your players don't. And because you're often prepping for games and spending a lot more time in the world than your party, you're able to see the big picture of the story a lot easier than they can. Connections that are obvious to you might not be as simple for everyone else. Pulling off fun and exciting twists is hard for even professional writers who have full control of their narrative. So cut yourself some slack if yours fell short. My advice is that when something doesn't get the reaction you were looking for, take some time after the game to assess why. Did the player seem confused by the reveal, like they were lacking information? Or maybe the new encounter mechanic you were dying to try out just didn't jive well with how they like to act in combat. Break down why it didn't work rather than just getting upset about it. So next time, you'll have a better chance of shocking or delighting the party. And if you are going to do a big twist, you'll need to lay on a lot of foreshadowing. Better to have it discovered early than to feel like it came out of left field. I write a lot of notes. Like, a lot of notes. When I prep, I like to have plenty to work with when it comes to cities, characters, and potential storylines. Whether you prep as much as I do, or just enough to get through the next session, there will inevitably come a time when you have to take all of your meticulously crafted, well-intentioned plans and throw them out. When you DM, your notes will get tossed. Not always, of course. There will be plenty of times when your prep goes as planned. Your players explore every nook and cranny of the city you've been fleshing out, and you get to use all of that prep work that you did. But there will also be lots of scenarios where the party veers in a direction that you never saw coming, and you have to put whatever you prepared on the back burner. The good news is that just because something doesn't get used does not mean it was wasted. You can always repurpose and reuse your notes in other ways. An abandoned mine that your player skipped can become the lair of an underground monster later in the campaign. The captain of the guard that your party never spoke to is now their rich benefactor for a later quest who just happens to have a military background. And sometimes, even if your prep wasn't used, just having it made you feel more comfortable at the table because you had a solid platform to build on and improvise with when your players started making decisions. And honestly, that alone is worth jotting them down. Combat is one of the core pillars of D&D. So much of the game and your players' abilities revolve around killing monsters and clashing swords. There are tons of ways you can make fights more exciting. Adding the terrain, giving bosses legendary actions, having secondary objectives, using great descriptions. But even if you do everything right, there's one universal truth that I've had to accept as I run the game. Combat is kind of a crapshoot. No matter how much you try to keep things balanced and subtly stack the odds for your monsters, there will be battles where your enemies get absolutely steamrolled. D&D is a game based around random chance. Sure, we use modifiers and DCs to change the odds, but at the end of the day, the dice have a huge say in any fight. Sometimes your players will just be rolling like crazy, getting crits and lots of damage, while your monsters can't seem to get above a 5. Other times, your players will just have spells and abilities that nullify a contest. Right as the Ice Devil moves in to crush the party wizard, it fails its charisma save and gets banished to the 9 hells. End of fight. Or your cleric uses Turn Undead to frighten the horde of skeletal monsters that you just had summoned, and of course they all fail to save. When your enemies get clobbered by the party, it's easy to get frustrated or upset that a battle you had planned on being challenging was a cakewalk. Instead, try to celebrate with your players, finding joy in their victory and really playing up their characters getting to be awesome heroes. When the party wins, make it a win for you too. There's always another fight around the corner. They can have this one. The Turbo Lich has awoken from his 1,000-year slumber, and it's wreaking havoc on the city. The dead rise from their graves, feasting on innocent villagers, and fire rains from the sky as the Dark Mage casts a 9th level meteor swarm. Amid the chaos, your party has to flee or... Wait, they want to fight him? The level 5 players whose only magic weapon is a moon-touched sword are going to face the Lich? Why aren't they running? Even in the face of certain death, most parties would rather all die in glory than run from a fight. This isn't always true, but in general, your friends aren't playing D&D because they want to be cowards. They're heroes, saving the realm and getting to live their power fantasy of being Legolas and Aragorn. Most parties also know that as the DM, you're usually trying to throw enemies at them that will challenge the party, but are still a fair matchup. So surely this Lich is the same, right? Be very careful before you set up a scenario where you expect the players to flee. More often than not, they'll either all die trying or end up winning, which could be disastrous for your long-term plans too. If you still want to go through with it, at least give them an obvious escape route, like a nearby flying ship or a dying NPC you can cast teleport. Sometimes players would like to run, but they feel cornered and believe their only option is to fight their way out. And honestly, D&D mechanics of dashing and disengaging make it hard to run from a battle on foot. Don't expect your players to flee at the first sign of danger. In fact, expect them to charge right in. World building is one of my favorite parts of DMing. I love coming up with new settings and fleshing out its history, people, and everything that makes it feel cool and unique. Part of what first appealed to me about D&D was that I could create a world and have my friends play around in it and change it up. But one thing that I've learned is that a lot of the time, your world building is mostly for you, not them. Don't get me wrong, there will absolutely be moments when your party takes an interest in the king's family line or an ancient battle that took place in the ruins they're exploring. And it'll also vary from person to person, with some players who love immersing themselves in your lore, and others who aren't nearly as interested. But on the whole, the person who will most enjoy your creative work is you, and if you expect your players to eat up every detail that you share about the world, you're going to be disappointed. Huge lore dumps, long monologues, and sheets of content you expect them to read will very likely bore your party. Instead, sprinkling in a little bit of your world building to the quests and places they explore, and then expanding on it if they show an interest, will probably go over a lot better at the table. And as they go on adventures across the land, they'll naturally experience different cultures and aspects of your setting as they interact with NPCs and visit cities. I'm not saying you shouldn't world build. Write to your heart's content, especially if it helps inspire future adventures and fuels your passion for the game, like it does for me. Just don't expect your players to read the tie-in novel you created as well. It's just too much. Picture the best DM in the world. Excellent roleplay, incredible combat encounters, knows every rule but is willing to bend them for fun. They craft detailed stories with interesting, fun plots, but give tons of room for creativity and deviating off the path. And they have lots of minis, which is a bonus. But here's the truth. None of that matters, unless they have great players too. You need party buy-in to have a great game of D&D. You can run the best horror campaign of all time, but if your players would rather be in a lighthearted, heroic adventure, it's not going to be fun. Working with your party to create a game that you want to run and they want to play in will save you a lot of headaches. And sometimes you might not be compatible with people who want a completely different experience. That's okay, because once you find the right group, your campaigns are going to be so much better. Those are a few of the tough lessons that I think every DM needs to learn. But once you do, it makes everything a lot easier. Do you agree with my choices or have lessons that were hard when you first started out? I'd love to hear them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like is always appreciated. If you want to see more, you can subscribe to the Bard's College. I make videos about D&D, DMing, and everything in between. So if you like this one, there's more to come. But for now, good luck, and remember, crit your players. I write a lot of notes. Like, a lot of notes. When I prep, I like to have plenty to work with when it comes to cities, characters, and potential storylines. Whether you prep as much as I do, or just enough to get through the next session,